Hello, welcome back. It's time for the April reading wrap up. I'm not going to lie, April was a little bit of a letdown. I had lofty goals, I had high hopes, I was very optimistic for the month of April, and a lot of things got in the way. Sometimes life just gets in the way of your reading, and that is what happened to me. I started a lot of books, but I only finished four. One of the books I finished, I did not like very much. Actually, I think I hated it. It really knocked the wind out of my sails. It ruined my reading momentum, but I had to finish it. It was the final installment in a series that I put so much time into. Sometimes you invest a lot of time into a series, lots of emotions, emotional highs and lows, and you expect catharsis. You expect fireworks. You expect a compelling ending, and I did not get that. It really, really ruined the trilogy for me. I'll talk more about that very shortly. Other distractions that got in the way of my reading. I have a fight at the end of May, UFC fighter by day, bookworm by night. I've been preparing for that. Me and the book club were really dragging our feet on the book we were reading in April. So a lot of things got in the way of my usual reading output. But consequently, I have a lot of books that I'm about halfway done with that I'm carrying over into May, and I'm very ecstatic, very optimistic for May, and this time I think it's warranted. We're going to talk about the books from books I enjoyed the least to books I enjoyed the most, worst to best. Let's get started. The book that single-handedly ruined my reading momentum for the entire month is The Toll by Neal Shusterman, the final installment in his Age of Scythe trilogy. I loved Scythe when I read it a year and a half ago. I had a more mixed reaction to Thunderhead, which is the second installment, but Thunderhead ended very well. I was expecting fireworks. I was expecting philosophical themes, lots of thought-provoking, plot points. And what I got was a plethora of plot twists. Sometimes an author really just tries to give a book a dozen or so endings. The only problem was, at the end of The Toll, I only enjoyed one of the several endings. It was very frustrating. Character arcs went in directions I was not anticipating, and I really feel like the way the central conflict was concluded was very lackluster and really just wasn't worth following the entire trilogy for. I was expecting a payoff, and I did not get that. I did like the philosophical themes. One of my favorite things about this trilogy is that it takes place in the distant future, utopia or dystopia, depending on your point of view, and the world is ruled by an all-powerful, benevolent AI called the Thunderhead. And the Thunderhead is the most interesting character in this trilogy. We get passages before many of the chapters that are like thoughts and meditations from the Thunderhead about its existence, about the, things going on in the world. And that was very compelling. We got a lot of that in The Toll. The problem was the interesting plot twist happened with about 20%, more to go in the book. And there was so much ground to cover. And I don't think Neal Shusterman pulled it off well. I had heard a lot of things about this book. A lot of people told me that it was by far the weakest installment in the Age of Scythe trilogy. That being said, I was not expecting to be as disappointed as I was. I'll have to give it a few more days to think about this. I finished this on the last day of April, but dang, I really feel like the author could have just made Thunderhead 100 pages longer and not even written this book. Super big letdown, one of the biggest letdowns of the year. But that's enough pessimism for one video. I enjoyed everything else I read in April, but the book I enjoyed the least out of three I have to talk about is The Dungeon Anarchist Playbook by Matt Dinniman, the third installment in his widely popular dungeon crawler Karls series. This book was a lot of fun. Funny dialogue, lots of hilarious hijinks. I love the relationship between Donut and Karl. I love how this world is expanding. I love how they're building relationships with all the other, crawlers in the dungeon. This is lit RPG goodness. It's not very serious, but that does not mean there's not emotional lows and highs. And there was an amazing plot twist about 2/3 of the way through this book that I was not anticipating that really just knocked this book to a higher level. If I was to have one complaint about the Dungeon Anarchist playbook, it is the plot is a little convoluted. It's a little hard to follow. The author even puts a warning in the beginning of the book, a little passage saying the characters are going to be talking a lot about this complicated thing. Don't even pay attention to it. It's not important. It'll all make sense at the end of the story. And when I read that, I was instantly annoyed. I was instantly on my guard because if the author knows that the story is hard to follow, that it's convoluted, just write it better. Trim it down. Make it less complicated. Because as I was reading and listening to this book, because the audiobook narration is absolutely astounding, I kept having to pause, replay, turn back a page so I could follow it. Because even though the author told me, you don't have to worry about this, I'm trying to make sure that as a reader that I am engaged, that I'm following it as closely as I can. So the plot was a little all over the place. The puzzle that this book was centered around was hard to follow. It did make sense at the end. I did not have to pay attention to it, but that was frustrating. It was a really fun story. I'm going to definitely be finishing all the installments that are out already in this series before the end of 2025. The Dungeon Anarchist playbook was great fun, but it was not nearly as fun or nearly as compelling or engaging for me as Karls' Doomsday Scenario, the second installment in Matt Dinniman's Dungeon Crawler Karls series. Karls' Doomsday Scenario grabbed hold of me, and it never let me go. Okay? The plot was so much fun. So much happened. Lots of character growth for Karl and Donna. I loved the ending. It hit me in the feels. If you're not familiar with Dungeon Crawler Karl, it's basically Hunger Games meets, little RPG. There's like a bunch of people in a dungeon trying to defeat each other, make it to the next level, and they become famous. They get interviewed from people off set. They're basically reality TV stars while also competing in this dungeon. The winner of the dungeon gets their freedom, essentially. It's very compelling. The premise doesn't seem that special, but the execution is chef's kiss. So much fun. Good dialogue, good character work, emotional highs and lows, lots of character deaths, lots of violence. Very, very funny things happen in this book, and it's incredibly engaging. This is definitely one of the series that I'm going to reread. And if you know me, I hate rereading books, but I'm going to read these books as they come out, and then when the author publishes the last installment, which he has said, there's only going to be 10 or 11 tops in this series. I'll reread all of Dungeon Crawler Karl. No regrets. Some series are worth reading twice, and Dungeon Crawler Karl's one of those series. I loved Karls' Doomsday Scenario, but not as much as I loved my winner for Book of the Month, The Green Mile by Stephen King. Stephen King is one of my favorite authors, and he doesn't just write horror. I had heard nothing but good things about The Green Mile. I was told that it would make me cry. I was told that it would hit me in the feels. I was told that it's Stephen King at his best, and even then, I was still blown away. I knew this book was going to be in the running for Book of the Month. Me and the book club read this book. We all loved it. We all cried. We had a very engaging, fun conversation about it. I'm sure the premise is familiar to you. It takes place in a prison on death's row, the Green Mile. It is told from the point of view of the CEOs at this prison as they, make these inmates who are sentenced to death, as comfortable as they can before they are put in the electric chair. Very gritty, very sombering stuff. One prisoner in particular, John Coffey, the mysterious, gigantic man, John Coffey, a man who seems simple, a man who seems dim-witted, a man who seems like there's no way he could have done what he's been accused of doing. And he may have mysterious powers. As we learn more about John Coffey and what he can do, the story just grows into something incredibly beautiful, very symbolic. Lots of religious allegory was present in The Green Mile. And as a believer, I love religious allegory. I love symbolic stories. The Green Mile did not disappoint. I cried 3 times, which is not a record, but a very respectable number of times it made me cry. I'm very emotional when I read. The Green Mile, I'm going to be releasing a video about this in the next week and a half or so. I have so many thoughts I want to share with you guys about it. I have not seen the movie. I will definitely be picking up the movie very soon because the book was absolutely astounding. If I was to make one complaint, I would say that because this book was originally published as a serialized novel in 6 parts, the pacing gets a little bogged down because at the beginning of every part, Stephen King makes sure to tell the readers what happened in the previous part. So it's like, last week on, and that kind of got old as it happened 5 or 6 times. But that's a very small complaint. I just wish that when it was compiled into one novel, they kind of just trimmed those passages. But yes, the book of the month for April is The Green Mile by Stephen King. No surprises there, but I must say, Karls' Doomsday Scenario was by far the most fun I've had reading so far in 2025. Now let's talk about all the wonderful books I started in April, but I'm pushing back to read in May. Firstly, Wizard and Glass by Stephen King. I read the first 170 pages of this in the first few days of April. I was making good time. I was really ecstatic. But then my friend Tommy, who I'm supposed to be reading this with, he was not ready to read it because he was reading Blackwater, and I couldn't blame him because Blackwater is my favorite novel of all time. So we agreed to pick this back up in May. I'm excited to get back into Wizard and Glass. Another book that I'm sure is going to be a masterpiece is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I read the first chapter of this. It was a bit of a slog. It just goes into the history and background of the Hobbits in very slow, painstaking detail. I was not anticipating that, but I realized that it has been over 10 years since I read The Hobbit. And I decided that I'm going to read The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring at the same time. I really feel like that'll help me become more immersed in Middle-earth. And I want to make sure I don't miss out on anything. I want to make sure everything is fresh in my mind because I have some good video ideas for The Hobbit. And I plan on doing some big things with The Lord of the Rings in the latter half of 2025. But I'm going to read The Hobbit and I'm going to read The Fellowship of the Ring in May. I think it'll be very nice to read those books very close together in order. One book I'm going to be finishing in the first 5 days of May that I'm not sure is going to end up being very good is A Fig for All the Devils by C.S. Fritz. I was watching a booktuber last month, and he was talking about this book. I don't remember his name. I'm sure it'll come to me. But this book was pitched to me as death personified. The Grim Reaper takes on an apprentice. And I love that. I love death being personified. I loved Mort by Terry Pratchett. I was thinking it would be a very similar feel. But no one is like Terry Pratchett. Yes, this book is filled with humor, but a very different type of humor that is not landing with me. I mean, this book has scared me a few times. It has made me feel unsettled. I'm sure it's going to end in a compelling way, but I can see why this book has not been very widely read. I can see why it has less than 1,000 reviews on Amazon. It's a little rough. It's a little YA, but I'm hopeful that it won't end up being bad. I have less than 70 pages left. I'll be finishing this in the next 2 days or so. And hopefully it's not too bad. Fingers crossed. Sorry for the slight change in camera angle. I finished filming the video, and then I realized that my phone ran out of memory halfway through. So now I'm back. The last book that is carrying over from April into May is Elrich of Melnibane by Michael Moorcock. Michael Moorcock is iconic. The influence he's had on the fantasy and science fiction genres is massive. He cast a very big shadow. I picked up Elrich of Melnibane, which is not the first book that is published in the Elrich saga, but it is the first book chronologically in the Elrich story. I was not anticipating this book to not be dated. Elrich fits in with all the anti-heroes of the present day, which is amazing because he predates them by decades. Elrich is the antithesis to Conan the Barbarian, the alpha male, macho, beautiful, strong, buff hero that beats up the bad guy with his muscles and then gets the beautiful princess. Elrich is not that dude. He is brooding, he is intellectual, He's kind of whiny. He's kind of dramatic. He's, sickly, small, pale, very weak. But consequently, he's very relatable. I'm about 33% through Elrich of Melnibane, and I'm loving it. Hopefully, I'll be one of those people that just clicks with Michael Moorcock. You either like him or you don't. And I heard that the Elric saga is not the best entry point into his Eternal Champion mega series, but right now it's the only, series I'm interested in from Michael Moorcock. So if I miss out on a few Easter eggs, so be it. I think as long as I'm enjoying what I'm reading, so far I will enjoy the Elric saga. I don't think the Elric saga will ever catch fire the way that many other classic series have caught fire here on BookTube, but there is a very vocal and very passionate minority of readers here on YouTube who have read Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion series, and they are still talking about it. I look at the subreddit for Michael Moorcock, and I see people that have been reading his books for decades, and they're still talking about it. They're still rereading it. Something that old that is still so widely read by people that have been reading it their entire lives, it has to be amazing. And I'm looking forward to seeing how amazing it is. On the manga and comic book front, I started 2 series. The first one, I'm sure you've heard of it, The Walking Dead. You heard of it before? It was a cultural phenomenon. I did not know until about 6 months ago that it started off as a comic book series. I watched the first 3 seasons of the TV show, and because I'm Gen Z and our attention span is very short, and we can't watch a show without being able to binge the entirety of the series, I fell off the Walking Dead bandwagon. But I think I'm going to read the comics first and perhaps return to the TV show. I've heard that the highest highs of the TV show are higher than the highest highs of the comic books. But overall, the comic books have a very little drop-off. And I'm excited about that because one of the main complaints that stopped me from restarting The Walking Dead and watching it is that a lot of seasons are much worse than the best seasons. I hate having that much variance in my escapism. So hopefully, I'll like the comic book series. I've read the first 4 or 5 issues. The pacing is breakneck, good character work. Rick Grimes, he's a little vanilla, but he's a lot more interesting so far in the comic than he was in the TV show. And that's exciting because the comic books are very much centered around Rick Grimes, and the TV show, he's kind of annoying. So that's a good thing. On the manga front, I started Welcome Back, Alice by Shuzo Oshimi. I love Shuzo Oshimi. He disturbs me in all the right ways. I find his stories to be unsettling, uncomfortable, creepy, eerie, disturbing, sometimes even perverted. If I'm being honest, he writes about adolescent angst and, a lot of the things we go through but we never talk about in a way that is just so icky and visceral and immersive and relatable. And even though I've never dealt with something that's similar to the premise of this manga, it captured me right away. I finished the first volume. It follows a young male protagonist who has a falling out with one of his friends. This friend leaves school and comes back, but now he's a woman. Drama ensues. I loved Happiness by Shuzo Oshimi. I loved Blood on the Tracks, and I loved The Flowers of Evil, and I'm sure I'll love Welcome Back, Alice. If Stephen King is my favorite author, Shuzo Oshimi is my favorite mangaka. I think that's how you pronounce it. My favorite manga storyteller. So there you have it. April was a decent month. I absolutely loved 2 books. I really liked another book. I hated one. And boy, did I hate it. But I did finish a series. And one of my goals for 2025 is to finish at least 12 series. And now the Age of Scythe is out of the way. Now, I just got to focus on May. May has such a stacked lineup. I am super optimistic for the reading of May. May, I have so much free time. I'm essentially only training for my fight, reading books, and being a dad. And those are like the only 3 things I live for. I'm thinking May is going to be awesome. I look forward to all the literary adventures I have in May. I can't wait to talk to you guys about it. Oh, before I leave, I finally have nailed down an uploading schedule for the channel. Long form videos on Monday and Friday, and short form videos on Saturday and Sunday. Hopefully, I can maintain that pace for the month of May and going forward in 2025. It's been a great year so far, but I still think the first half is going to have nothing on the second half. I'll talk to you guys next time.